Congressional infighting over a single bill? It's like watching a family argue over how to spend their lottery winnings before they've even bought a ticket. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of Republican strategy and the emerging tensions that could shape our nation's future.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it. So what's causing all this drama within the Republican Party?
Well, it all centers around the newly elected House Speaker, Mike Johnson from Louisiana. He's barely had time to warm up his seat, and already he's facing some pretty significant challenges. You see, Johnson and his House colleagues are pushing for one large budget reconciliation package to implement President-elect Donald Trump's second-term agenda. They want to get it to Trump's desk by April.
That sounds like a pretty ambitious timeline. How are Senate Republicans reacting to this approach?
That's where things get really interesting. The Senate Republicans seem to prefer a piecemeal approach, wanting to tackle border security first, then move on to tax policy. It's like they're saying, let's get the essentials first, then we'll see what's left. But here's the kicker. Johnson went on Sunday television claiming that Trump supports his approach of one large bill. That's a bold move, especially for someone who's just stepped into the role.
Wow, that's quite a statement. How did the Senate side respond to that?
Well, let's just say they weren't thrilled. In fact, one unnamed Senate Republican aide told Politico, and I quote, "Unfortunately, Mike Johnson doesn't have a ton of credibility because he has gotten ahead of himself before." Ouch! That's the kind of comment that makes you wince, even if you're just overhearing it.
That's some pretty harsh criticism. It sounds like there's a real lack of trust between the two chambers. How do you think this infighting might affect their ability to actually get things done?
That's a great question. It certainly doesn't bode well for their efficiency or unity. And here's what I find really intriguing. Senator Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma is actually supporting Johnson's approach, but his reasoning is, well, let's just say it's not exactly a ringing endorsement of his House colleagues.
Oh? What did Mullin have to say about it?
So, Mullin said, and I'm quoting here, "It seems more realistic, especially given the recent speaker's election, that we may only get one bite at the apple because you have a highly thoughtful and a highly dysfunctional House." It's like he's saying, let's put all our eggs in one basket, because I'm not sure we'll get another basket.
That's quite the backhanded compliment. It sounds like he's supporting the strategy more out of pessimism than optimism.
Exactly. And it raises some interesting questions about the effectiveness of our legislative process, doesn't it? I mean, if lawmakers are making strategic decisions based on the assumption that they can only pass one major bill, what does that say about our system?
It's certainly concerning. And what about the timeline they're working with? You mentioned earlier that Johnson wants to get this bill to Trump's desk by April. That seems like a pretty tight schedule for such a comprehensive package.
You're absolutely right. It's an incredibly ambitious timeline, especially given the divisions we're seeing. And it makes you wonder how much careful consideration and debate can happen in that time frame. Are we sacrificing thorough policymaking for the sake of speed and political wins?
That's a valid concern. We've seen similar rushes to pass comprehensive legislation in the past, often with unintended consequences. The Affordable Care Act and the Patriot Act come to mind. Both were massive bills passed relatively quickly, and both had far-reaching effects that weren't fully anticipated at the time.
Those are excellent examples. It really highlights the tension between the desire for quick action and the need for careful, deliberative lawmaking. And in this case, we have the added complication of a new president coming into office with a specific agenda he wants to implement quickly.
Right, and that raises another important point. The role of bipartisanship, or lack thereof, in this process. If Republicans are focused on pushing through a partisan agenda as quickly as possible, what does that mean for the possibility of finding common ground and crafting policies that have broader support?
That's a crucial question. It's like they're playing a short-term game in a long-term system. We've seen how partisan legislation can lead to policy whiplash when control of government changes hands. It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth, with each side trying to undo what the other has done.
And that kind of instability can be really challenging for businesses, individuals, and the economy as a whole. People need some level of certainty to make long-term plans and investments.
Absolutely. And here's what I'm really curious about. How do you think this approach might affect public trust in government institutions? If people see lawmakers rushing through major legislation without thorough debate or bipartisan input, it could further erode trust in the legislative process.
That's a profound observation. It might reinforce the perception that politicians are more interested in scoring quick wins than in crafting thoughtful, effective policies. And that erosion of trust can have far-reaching consequences for our democracy as a whole.
Exactly. It's not just about this particular bill or even this particular administration. It's about the long-term health of our political system. But let's bring it back to the immediate situation. As we wrap up our discussion today, what do you think are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be watching for as this story continues to unfold?
Well, I think there are a few key things to keep an eye on. First, we should watch how this tension between House and Senate Republicans plays out. Will they be able to come to a consensus on their legislative strategy, or will these divisions deepen? Also, pay attention to the timeline. Will they be able to meet that April deadline Johnson has set, and if so, at what cost?
Those are great points. I'd add that it's important to keep an eye on how Democrats respond to this strategy. Will they attempt to slow down the process? Or will they try to influence the content of the legislation in any way? And more broadly, I think it's crucial for our listeners to consider the implications of this approach to lawmaking. How might it affect the policies that impact their daily lives? And what does it say about the state of our democracy and our ability to address complex issues in a thoughtful, comprehensive way?
Absolutely. It's a reminder that these political maneuverings aren't just abstract games. They have real-world consequences for all of us.
Well said. As always, we'll be here to keep you updated as this story develops. Thanks for tuning in to Gen FM, where we dive deep into the stories that shape our world. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep engaging with the democratic process.
And remember, whether you agree or disagree with the strategies being employed, your voice and your vote matter. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.